Well, hello everyone. Merry holidays, whatever they are for you. And well, if you do have a tree standing around in your home right now, something like that, I don't know, or like those Christmas trees, then I thought maybe this might be a good occasion to bring something to attention. And I thought we could play attention with our relationship to the trees and the forests and the woods, and the way that we treat them, and the way that we could treat them as they treat us. And yeah, so my idea was to just go a little into something of a random thought train, considering that we used to call the ages of humankind, of our humanimal families, we call as our ages by the material that we use to make our tools, right? So there was a time that we call Stone Age, where our tools were made of stone, remarkably so, in the way that they follow the grain of the stone to make tools. And that is the grain of the stone, or the grain of the wood, is something that I think the Chinese call li. It's the same kind of grain that we have in our fabric, in our flesh, and it's following the path of the Tao. So, well, you know how Bob Marley said, only half the story's been told. The other half of the story of the stone, and then the bronze and the copper and the Iron Age and what we could call the Plastic Age now. The other half of that story is the fact that those tools come with wood, and they come from the wood, and without the wood, neither the tools nor you and me would be what we are. And considering that for a second, even the plastic that we have today and the fossil fuels that we use are there because of wood, because there was a time when plants invented the wood and they would go, woohoo, let's make trees. But there were no bacteria around yet who could digest the structure of the wood. So instead it turned into what we now call the fossil fuels, the coal and the oil and the petroleum and all these things, and in that way also to the plastic. But really, where does the wood come from? It comes from the trees, right? And we are very familiar with the trees, even though they are probably more familiar with us than we are with them. And we have a great many tools to create, to make sounds, to make houses, to make structures and whatever we need. Heat our rooms and our homes with wood. And yet we tend to force the wood to follow something of an idea that is not really maintainable unless you add more to this than just the idea of a cube, have the diagonals in there, or create some kind of tension in the corners that triangulates the structure. But this is the mindset we have, whereas the one that the trees follow is this one, and they grow into the ground, down, like the roots then they have their stem, and then they grow out into the world again. And like a torus, they connect the soil with the air, and they breathe what we breathe. They connect us to these great circles, and the wood, is also integral part of the water cycles that we have. It is that missing link between where the water runs from the ocean into the air and down into the forest as rain, and then goes through the trees, goes through life and all those shapes and forms it comes, and then it goes into the ground where it connects back to the rivers that feed the ocean. So they are always there, and they are probably so much wiser than we are. And what I would try to argue for, what I would like to suggest, is that we could stop cutting all those trees down and cutting them into the shape of, and essentially this idea of a uniform world, to make these kinds of structures with wood in all kinds of rectangles and these things, but instead follow the grain of the wood, the Li, and go with its own behavior and its own ways of doing. And you see, I can do something with this that I couldn't if I wanted to make it a cube, a non-triangulated one like this. If I were to connect this wood with that wire or string for that matter, and wanted to create this kind of structure where there is only the square visible that you want to have in your cube, you wouldn't get it. It wouldn't stand. It couldn't hold. But in this, you could see the squares here, and you could say there's 3 of them interlocked, but really those squares aren't really connected. It is the triangles, the left angles, that are the connection, and the square is but an interplay of movement and bodies. But this is how we could be building our necessities of life, and we could build it into the woods, into the forests, and also into the waters, and wherever we need to. As you can, for instance, put it all up on sticks again, and you get a house, a structure that is resilient to winds and waters and earthquakes and whatever you could have. And the isolation, the insulation of this shape, you would say, okay, there is no insulation here, right? Because there is no surface that you could identify. But really, the surface is when you increase the number of triangles to a point where you can't look through. And it is still a matter of shape how well insulated a room is. And these rooms that we inhabit, that we force into the world, these cubes here, they have a problem in that sense, because they have dead air in the corners, because the cube is still holding on to spheres of space-time. It's just that parts of it stick out of it. So you have parts of the inside that really are outside but disconnected, and then are dead air. But really the biggest problem is that that shape has a volume of 3 tetras, whereas a octa like this has the same number of parts but a volume of 4. And to understand what I mean with that volume comparison, it's necessary to understand that if I have a 4i like this, it is my unit of space-time volume. So this edge here is the distance that I account for now, and to compare this with other volumes, I could look at it like this, for instance, where the tetra goes to the octa here. It's the same dimensions, it's the same scale, so I can say that this here has the same volume as this, but this there has a volume of 4 times that. So if I say that a cube or an octa or a tetra or a 20i or something has a certain volume in terms of tetras, it is always in reference to the respective unit of the edge here. That is important because, of course, this is smaller than this, and still we can talk about relative comparisons of space and volume, and that is what synergetics allows us to do, because it really relates all of those very well. So if I wanted to have this cube, go check my videos where I show how to stabilize it or deconstruct it altogether. To stabilize it, I would need 6 diagonals, thus creating a tetra inside of it, and that would hold the cube. And in relationship to that tetra, that particular cube has a volume of 3 times the tetra, whereas the accompanying same frequency octa here has a volume of 4. So we have more volume in relationship to the surface than we would have with a cube. A cube has thus worse climatic, characteristics, right? So the best, if you want to have a big, if you really want to have very little investment in your heating or cooling in the summer, or in general the climate of your space that you inhabit, then it is much wiser to go with a 20i, which has a very high volume with a low surface, or even the octa, which has a relatively large interior volume with a relatively small surface. So you have a better rate of heat transmission, because that is dependent on the surface to volume ratio, because it is the surface of a system, the ice of the system, where inside and outside exchange temperature. So the more you have inside with less outside, the more you keep what is inside. Whereas in this, you can't really have positive, synergetic kinds of climates. Yes, but I was drifting away for a long time now, because what I wanted to say is that you can actually do something that you can't with the cube with this shape, because you see these corners are flexible, they are not rigid, they aren't glued together, nor are they joined with joinery, which you could do, but really they are. I could do the same with a string, right? So it is not the connection that is giving the shape to the structure, but it is the structure that gives strength and stability to these connections. So you see, with this kind of structure and construction, you don't need to cut the wood of the trees into rectangles and squares to begin with. You know how many trees we've cut down and during the wood age of our species, when we came down from them and began to build with them and went to all these ages of stone and other materials, and then got into that mindset of the square thinking. And you know how many trees we have cut into cubes? It's really incredible to think of. And it always comes at a cost, because you put energy in, you waste material, and you don't get the optimal strength out of the material that you use, because wood is grown and there is the grain of the wood going through. And if you cut wood with a saw and you don't follow the grain of the wood, then you always break fibers from the wood. Whereas if you take an axe and work the wood with that, you follow the grain. You don't really have a choice there. You always go triangulated, and you follow the grain and keep the entire fiber and fabric of the wood throughout the material. And you can have much smaller dimensions of trees in use to create structures this way than you would be used to with the rectangular ones. And I made a structure like this, well, actually like this one, from 3 meter long. I didn't do it alone, but we did it. We made it from 3 meter wood with the holes in the ends that we tied together with string, well, actually rope, and we got a very great, beautiful structure from that has a hexagonal ground. And anyways, I was just saying that it was the same kind of structure then, or construction, as this, just with rope. And you know how much work we had to put into that wood just to work around the fact that it had been cubed, right? So in order to make this work, we had to cut off all those rectangles, at least to a degree, so that it wouldn't be just a pain to lean on or something. And I thought, what a waste in that regard, right? Because the trees didn't grow that way. They grew round, and one could have just used them as they grow to make a structure like this. So yeah, that's something I'm gonna do soon when I get the materials, and I want to create something that doesn't really look like a geodesic dome for a change, but a synergetic kind of house, tiny house, And there are so many ways in which you can use and apply left angles to create structure. This is, for instance, these are like these little coffee cup thingies, to whirl around. And I didn't glue them together, they are just holding each other. So this pattern is very popular and famous as a symbol, and it's also used in Japanese weaving, basket weaving, like this. Not just Japanese, but the Japanese call it kagome. You see this pattern. But you can also use it to create... now I don't know where to point. You can use it to create fabric or whatever, but you can also use it to weave together wood, like this. And you don't need glue. You don't need the tree to grow in rectangles or something like that. You can use it as it is, and it's just understanding that the patterns matter. The pattern integrity matters. And yes, there are squares in the universe, but they are always triangulated. This is a square, right? You could think so. Multiple squares, but really those are there because it's the way the triangles interact and meet. Yeah. So anyways, that was me going on tangents, I guess, but also trying to reconnect some of the missing links. And maybe this helps to spark some thought and some reconsideration of connections and relationships and the way that we belong to the world and it doesn't belong to us. We come out of it and not into it. Yes, and maybe this is an inspiration for you to look at the way you are taught that the world works and reconsider that, to see how very, very many aspects of this world tell you otherwise. If you just look at them and listen and, well, play with them. Play attention. Anyways, I hope you have a good time and thank you for listening.